Good afternoon. Thanks again, Vidak and Beryl for having us today. So this panel, we're going to break it down into research today, AI today, what could possibly happen in the future, whether that's agents or other interesting things, and maybe we'll get to some structured versus unstructured data topics as well. When I ask questions, I will let you guys introduce yourselves, a little bit about your background, and you could answer that along with your question. But just to set the table for some historical context, when I was on the buy side, I'll make this brief. When I was on the buy side 15, 20 years ago, using a filing in research was not an easy thing to do. Sometimes you couldn't even find filings on websites of some of these companies. And you fast forward to about 7 years ago, I did my first project with AlphaSense, and the project was an earnings quality project where I had to look for SEC filings where there were actions against companies who were not following the non-GAAP rules. And it was very simple. Put in some search words and it spit out a lot of documents. Fast forward again to today, we're in an LLM world where you can do things like summarization, extraction, classification. It's very productive, it's very efficient, it happens very fast. And so the folks up here today are going to talk about their businesses and what the world looks like today in a natural language world. So I'll start with Matt. Why don't you start with what's going on with AlphaSense, keyword, natural language, or what you guys have going on today for research?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So Matt Angrist, been at AlphaSense now for 11 years. So I've been able to see kind of the transformation of search on unstructured content. And so that's the idea. I worked at Bloomberg, 𝐏𝐀𝐍𝐄, Thomson before that, and very much structured quantitative information. Moving over to the AlphaSense side, I was able to see what you can do on the unstructured content out there and how you can make that very easily searchable and summarizable. It's not it. And so the ability to be able to give users, analysts at hedge funds, at private equity firms, bankers, the ability to search across hundreds of millions of documents in seconds by keyword and understand the context of their search and the intent of their search, allowing them to find that unique insight that would have taken them a day, 2 days, 3 days, now takes them 30 minutes or an hour. And so we've basically built this technology that allows them to go ahead and do that in a really easy way.
Great, thank you. And Akarsh from Ravenpack. Ravenpack's well known for its quant product, and it's been around for a really long time. But I think the advent with this new technology has allowed them to launch big data. So why don't you talk about your current new offering?
Thank you. Name's Akarsh Ramshtani, run strategy at Ravenpack. I think I've always been at a panel for quantitative data. This is the first time I'm going to talk about unstructured data. We just launched a new product called bigdata.com. And like bigdata.com, we're positioning it to be a ChatGPT for finance, Perplexity for finance. We're kind of fascinated by unstructured workflows. Search has been a passion of mine for about 10 years. So the basic tenet here is that we're starting to see folks can ask questions to very large archives of data in a way that they've never been able to do before. I'd also point out, thank you AlphaSense for paving the way here. I think they showed us that there is a need for better search on financial content, better archives, better tagging, better enrichment. Bigdata.com is designed to help enable analysts to do the kinds of things that they couldn't do before. And yeah, we'll talk a lot about that today.
Great, thanks. And Richard, Bain & Co., you see a lot of stuff, and you've been there 20 years, which is pretty unusual for the financial services industry. So, whether it's your partnerships, your alt data, some of your workflows, what are you seeing as the research effort today?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, and thanks for having me here. So I'm Richard Lichtenstein. As Brian mentioned, I've been here 20 years at Bain. I'm our chief data officer for our private equity business, and I co-lead our work around Gen AI and private equity. And so I've probably worked directly with about 40 funds, talked to probably well over 100, and probably done about 70 projects on Gen AI in the last couple of years. Some of it helping funds think about how to make their own businesses more efficient. Some of it thinking about, a lot of it is diligence, so they're looking at a new business and trying to figure out how is Gen AI going to affect that business in good ways or bad ways. And then some of it is companies they already own, so which companies are at risk or have opportunities and how do they go after those, and then working with the companies directly. So I spent a lot of time on this. I also have a big team of people at Bain, over 100, and part of what they do is develop new tools and things, and we've been building a lot with Gen AI, and that's been exciting, and obviously we've partnered with many people, including AlphaSense and others, to help create tools that our teams can get value from. I mean, I think the big trend that I'm seeing when I talk to their customers, really, to private equity funds, is they know they're sitting on a lot of data, right? I mean, they know they've looked at a lot of deals, they own a lot of companies, they have it all, and they don't know where any of it is. I mean, it's sitting on people's hard drives, it's sitting all over the place, they have no clue. And so their number one need, if you ask them, is we just want a knowledge management system. We want something where we can search for something and find it. And then obviously if it was able to plug into other sources too, right, to third-party sources, that's a real bonus, right, then it's even better. But that need for just even basic knowledge management as a starting point is sort of the foundational layer that every fund is looking for.
Great. Let's go to Evan from Verition. So Evan, if you could talk a little bit about how you guys think about, or what you think about when you see these types of high quality platforms pop up, how you guys think about build versus buy, and if not you, maybe the industry, because maybe you don't talk about you, if that would help. And maybe your hammer versus nail analogy.
I hate talking about myself, as you know. Evan Reich, head of data from Verition Fund Management. I think we're a large multi-strat hedge fund, have about, 200 or so PM pods right now across fundamental, quantitative, kind of everything. I think where we come at the problem from is very sort of the opposite of where sort of Richard, I think, is coming at the problem from, in that we don't have much internal data. It's not people thinking about first-party knowledge management so much. It's more about all of the third-party data people are getting and how to sort through it, because there are so many various ways that people are trying to solve problems, so many different companies they're trying to understand, and so many different inputs. So working with the AlphaSenses of the world, working with the Ravenpacks and the big datas of the world. The hammer and nail thing Brian's referring to, because it's a story I've told a couple times, is I think as we've seen the development of AI, it's a tool that everybody's excited about, and it's a hammer, but nobody knows quite what a nail looks like. So they're running around and they're busy hitting everything. They're hitting themselves, they're hitting their neighbors, they're hitting their neighbors' toes, they're hitting their toes. And sometimes they hit things and money comes out and they go, oh, and then they hit it again and see if money keeps coming out, and then they keep hitting it. But it's finding those things and understanding what are the tools you can provide and where the limitations are and hallucinations and things of that nature. So what's exciting about where big data and AlphaSense and folks like that are coming at it from is now you have trusted knowledge sources underlying these things, rather than, we get interesting stuff coming out of ChatGPT, but what's in it is sort of ill understood. It's like, it's all the things, but what does all the things exactly mean? Versus having these high quality partners with high quality data that when you query them, these kinds of platforms are now, very much saying like, hey, here's an output, but here's where I got it from, so you can chase it down, so you can see where this is happening from, so that you can have a meaningful conversation. I think we were talking before this panel, Karsh was saying that, people are having like 45-minute, hour-long conversations trying to understand and converse and get to the bottom of what some of these data sources are saying. And I think that's the exciting part of it, is people can explore in a depth and get knowledge about things that historically were just not possible because it wasn't easy to do. It was cumbersome. In the early days of AlphaSense, it was an amazing tool, but it was like Google for everything, where you could find a keyword, but now you can query it, you can interact with it, you can go back and forth with it. You can, if you say the wrong word, it can understand what you're saying and use a knowledge graph to pick the word 3 words down the line and have those kind of interactions. And then you can really start building interesting queries, interesting concepts, interesting linkages from the universe of what's out there. That's the interesting part about it, what we're attacking mostly.
Great. And Richard, just a real quick one. I'm curious, that you talk to so many funds, what inning do you think we are in terms of folks working with AI, understanding how good it is, implementing strategies or workflows? Are we in early days, or are you seeing some pretty good sophistication out there?
So I think it depends exactly kind of what you're, almost what you're asking for, right? So I think if you say, are funds thinking about Gen AI when they do a deal? Absolutely. I mean, we have some stats from a survey we did. I think I'm not allowed to say the percentage, but a very high percentage of funds said, we've killed a deal because of Gen AI in the last year. And an equally high percentage said, we've underwritten a little bit extra on the deal because we think there's some Gen AI upside. So on that, they're getting pretty sophisticated about assessing the risks and opportunities. I think applying it to their own work, we're in, I don't know, I'm sure even like I think they're still playing the national anthem, right? I mean, like we're not even, the game hasn't even started yet. Because I think most funds, look, most PE funds especially, I mean, they don't have the kind of huge teams you're talking about, right? They've got like 3 data people at the center in the fund for the whole fund, for a whole giant fund with tens of billions of dollars of AUM. So they need a vended solution that's going to come in and solve this, really help them get started for sure. Those vended solutions really have only come in the market in the last, 6 months, really. And so a lot of them are, they're piloting them, they're testing them, but I haven't seen very many funds that have truly, they've adopted something, it's working, everyone's using it, they're getting tons of value from it.
That's great visibility. So some of the hammer and nail stuff that is going on, like Evan talks about. So that's state of play today. If we think about what the future of research holds, we can get a little bit more creative. Matt, I think your search capacity, like Evan talked about, with the massive content you have, with the relationships you have with research houses, seems like there's an interesting search and flywheel effect. Do you want to talk about how that works for you and how you think it's going to play out over time? And maybe since we're doing both public and private markets today on this panel, talk about what you're seeing in private equity versus public.
Yeah, and before I answer that, I want to point on something you guys kind of talked about there, was Evan kind of saying that internal content isn't a big deal for them. And we hear from a lot of private equity firms that it is a big deal, but also I think there are hedge funds out there that have a lot of private internal content that they do want to search across. So things like they write notes on every CEO of public companies, or they have their own theses about companies, and they have one analyst that has a bullish signal, one is bearish. They actually want to bring all of that together, be able to consolidate that and search across it in a really smart way. And so these firms are trying to think, how can we utilize these disparate opinions and bring it all and allow our teams to say, who's the most bullish person at this company about this stock? And that's been a really interesting thing to be able to work with these clients on doing that. Yeah.
Great. And so did you want to talk about the search and flywheel? And then Karsh, I know he has plenty to say too. So.
Yeah, no. So basically we built a search technology from the ground up. And the whole idea when we first started was, let's build the search technology on top of unstructured content. And so little by little, the search got better, the content grew bigger. So when I first started there, we had filings and transcripts, and that was it. Those are the only 2 content sets we had. We now have hundreds of millions of documents that range from earnings call transcripts to broker research. We actually have acquired 2 expert networks and now have an expert transcript library. And so the idea that we're able to search across all of this content in a really smart way and understand the language. So, to give you an example, if an analyst were to say, I want to read about the, EV landscape, AlphaSense knows what the EV landscape means. It'll find things like electric vehicles or fuel cell or hybrid or battery powered. It knows the word landscape means market players, trends, strengths, weaknesses of that market, different factors that are going to impact that landscape, and it will output the answer for you. And so we basically have built and this is fairly new, it's a Gen search, we call it, and it's our ChatGPT style search, but the beauty is that it runs across the content that these users know is highly credible and highly valuable, and it's not just the entire web. And we're also able to source back and show them the citation of where that information came from. We know we're dealing with clients that are every dollar or every decision they make can be millions of dollars, and so we need to make sure that they have the confidence that the tool is going to give them factual and correct answers. And so that's a big part of our search, is the auditability back to the source.
Fantastic. Karsh, he's had a number of seats where he's been the builder and creating things, including his current role. So in the context of what does the future of research hold, do you want to talk a little bit about agentic workflows or analyst alpha, or however you think about some of these things?
Yeah, this is a great topic. So I'm a big fan, by the way, of what AlphaSense does. I've been using their platform, at least on the buy side. I think our take is we've run about 100 pilots with 100 different funds. I'll speak more on the public funds or funds that invest in like public markets. I can tell you that where we are in the journey of search being applicable in the hedge fund space, everyone has tried a POC with 20,000 documents. But then they look at their internal archives, and these are hundreds of thousands or millions of documents, and most of these internal POCs are failing. What they really want to do is you can bucket it into a few things. And I'll start with keyword search is a few keywords. A large language model prompt is like 15 keywords. And then it's like, oh, but I want you to answer like this. Just that itself is like, how do you take a interpretation of somebody, what they are trying to say that, hey, I want you to look here, but I want all these other clauses associated with it. And our thesis is that like this is where agentic workflows are going to shine, where you can take a person's query, you can decompose it into how an analyst would actually search. You would run hundreds of searches on behalf of the analyst. That's what agents are really good for, right? Read a lot, and large language models are the best compressors of information we've seen. So it can take and succinctly tell you, okay, in order to ask you a question, here's 15 other questions I had to ask. I read everything, I summarized it, and then I gave you a table back with inline citation, very important in the finance space, but then it gives you an answer back. That workflow did not exist even 7 months ago, or it existed in a POC inside your tiny cluster, but that itself, to be able to do that over 20 years of data, and you can say, okay, and another example is, how do I study what happened at a certain period in time? What were the companies that were exposed to it? How did it actually play out? Now there's a new hurricane that happens. Is it still the same insurance companies that are going to get hit? Is it somebody else that's going to get hit? We get a lot of event-based studies that want an agent to go back in time, read what happened in a prior kind of event, and then come and summarize for you. Here's what we found. What do you want to do about this new event that occurred right now? I can continue down that path, but you can see that agents with good search is an entirely new capability that didn't actually exist before.
Yeah, I think this idea of searching, and it's a little bit off subject, but finding patterns that maybe humans wouldn't recognize with technology is just an amazing concept, to your point. So, Evan, in the context of future of research, I'd be curious, when you think about your fund or funds like yours, how do you see people reacting to the availability of technology? Are they scared? Are they worried about their job security? Are senior people acting differently than junior people? Any thoughts there?
I mean, everybody's excited about it. I think the main thing is, the number one resource that any place really has is talented humans. And so anything you can do to get a force multiplier on their work so that they can do more in less time or evaluate more things or whatever, that's power. That's the hardest thing. And so the thing that makes all of these tools exciting is, as Karsh was describing about agentic tools, having the ability to fire off 15 threads, explore something, come back with an answer in, a minute, then be able to follow up and ask those questions. Those are the kind of workflows that would have historically taken days, weeks, months. And so the fact that you can chase those down quickly means you can develop theses that were literally impossible before because you couldn't evaluate things quickly enough. You can explore things far more fully than you ever could, generate bigger ideas, so then you can use, an AlphaSense-esque platform to dig more deeply into the financial statements and the things they've said and tie it all together and investigate other threads altogether. It really opens up so much potential. And so the challenge going forward is going to be, as these things evolve, there are going to be a set of tools that, or a set of tasks, I should say, that people just don't have to do anymore, that don't make sense. So I think, and it's not really the tools that are up here on stage, or not yet anyway. But at some point, people are not really going to be reading bond indentures anymore. At some point, that's clearly going to be something that's going to be handled purely by technology, and that's going to lead to some consequences. If nobody reads any bond indentures, then how do you become the senior person who knows everything by reading 10 trillion bond indentures and you know how it all works? Well, we're going to have to train people differently because they're not going to grow up reading 10 million bond indentures. The AI is going to read it. And so that's going to lead to some interesting questions about where do we deploy resources? How does that work? What are the jobs people don't need to be doing? I think, if you look at the legal space, the amount of work, which is obviously very similar to a bond indenture because it's just a glorified legal document, but seeing the way that attorneys have taken to that space, at some point there will not be paralegals anymore, or what they're going to be doing is going to be very different than what they've historically done because reading those documents is going to be purely an AI's job. And that's going to be a question as to what that means and how we translate that. And that's a whole set of interesting questions that as a society we're going to have to solve, not just as investment people, but as everything, because these are jobs that won't exist. It raises a lot of interesting questions.
Thank you. And Richard, what about agentic workflows in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, I have a lot of great discussion on this. This is because it's a very interesting topic. I mean, the first thing I think, just to build on what you were saying, is we built like an agentic bot for one of our clients where we, same idea. It spools up bots, and they spool up little bots, and the bots all come together and try to answer it. And so there's two things. One, we're really excited about the new generation of more inference-based models, O1, the new Sonnet stuff, because today what we found is when these bots go off and they go on their little tasks, the answers they come back with aren't that great, right? Like they might find where the answer is, but their ability to take it and actually come up with something smart to say is not as good as what a human could do if they had the same information. And so when you start compiling, a bunch of kind of somewhat mediocre analysis together, you kind of get a mediocre answer. But we think that when you add these new models in, suddenly you'll get a really good answer, and then you'll get a really good answer. So we get excited. The other point I just wanted to make quickly is, you made the point about it taking about a minute. My experience is it can take 5 or 10 minutes. And one of the things I find amazing is that people will get really impatient. It's something that used to take a person an entire day to go do, but they'll be really impatient when they have to wait 10 minutes for a bot to do it for them.
I agree with that, by the way.
Isn't that crazy though?
The
100%.
perception of how long it should take for you to think through 100 different queries, think about each one, then give an answer. It needs to be done in 10 seconds, and you're like, no, actually cannot happen in 10 seconds.
I think it's a byproduct of the alternative data world, because you're doing demos for folks, if you're on the buy side or so. You're doing demos, you take actions, they're watching it on Zoom, and they want to see the answer. I mean, literally a year ago, if we had a 10-second delay on a UI demo, people would be like, oh my God, this is unacceptable. So to your point, if you're going to do all these searches, it's definitely going to take a long time, and I'm very curious to see how people react to that, if they will have the tolerance to wait for these good answers. I don't know if you have anything to share on that.
Well, I mean, again, it's what's your alternative? You send a human to do it, they'll come back in a day, right? So I mean, but I agree. How you build this into your interfaces and message people about what's happening, and get them to buy into it is a tough it's a tough UI challenge, yeah.
And it's a fascinating. So what about cost though? So we can search and search and search and search, but at some point, the endless searches are going to cost a lot of money. Do you see anybody pushing back on cost of the effort? And I'm not talking cost of a license to a platform, but cost of all of the compute that it's required. Or is that not something that's at the forefront of what you're seeing? And that may be the case because you guys you're incented and driving towards innovation, not worrying about cost. But we don't have to say on the video that you're not worried about cost.
No, we're obsessed with cost. Archiving 20 years and 20 terabytes of data, vectorizing it, making it available in real time is a very, very expensive. I think we have a 100-node cluster that's just running just for the search parts, not even the inference parts. Inference is an additional cost on top of that. I think the question I usually ask a PM is what is it worth you having a junior analyst read through 500 different transcripts, identify a specific trend, prepare a report, build a presentation, come to you in a week and a half and say, I think this is a good idea. And I've done this, I can just tell you, then you pitch it, and then the person usually asks you one question, and it derails your entire analysis, and you got to go back to the drawing board and do the exact same thing again. That, you know what? I'll pay $50 for that. If it's that cheap, as compared to spending a whole week doing it, because you can get to the same question, you can just ask 10 more questions, right? And that's kind of the ROI. And not all PMs, I think, are on board with that way of thinking. It's one of those things that we're seeing early adopters. Obviously, all the large funds are doing this in various different ways. But then we have a lot of smaller hedge funds that are thinking, they're like, is that my edge? That I would adopt this faster than the larger ones that have a more well-established process, and maybe that's how I gain an edge or I gain an alpha. And it's actually playing out. The smaller firms are much more amenable to exploring these technologies because they're like, this is how I compete now. How else do I compete?
It's also interesting, though, in thinking about the AI providers in the landscape, because obviously each of your organizations are large, mature organizations that have the ability to assume some cost to run these things and build these things, whereas the folks that are coming along that are doing it as a startup where the cost of compute is a lot for them, It's not like, hey, we can just run a POC and show you a thing in your office. They're like, can we like run this on your AWS account and get you to pay for it? Because like, this amount of money is a lot for us to be showing people things. It actually does become quite complex, and it's an interesting set of questions because everybody does need to at the end of the day. I don't think anybody thinks about their AWS bill like in the moment of doing something, but at the end of the month, you very, very, very much think about your AWS bill, and it is significant. And so it's just one of those questions of like, can we do something about it? Should we be trying to? Or, Karsh was alluding to, if you've got, if you can spend $50 to solve an amazing problem, like you want to do that all the time and twice on Sunday. But that doesn't mean that like you can just be running down random threads that aren't leading anywhere. And at some point, somebody's going to go, wait a minute. So it's a question, but it's still out there enough. And I think this is all nascent enough that the people that are doing it have just kind of accepted that as the cost of doing business. There's a lot of people that haven't because they're not ready to accept that as the cost of doing business.
Right, and a lot of investors have given AlphaSense monies, and so they're helping with that cost, of course, because they love what you guys do. So I don't know if you or Richard have another comment on cost related to what they've been talking about.
Yeah, well, so I guess I'd say two thoughts on this. One, I think that the cost, though, seems to be coming down really fast, right?
It's a race to zero.
It's like
it's a race to zero right
exactly.
now.
And
you
so
just stay alive for that long.
Yeah, exactly. So to some extent, I feel like this doesn't feel like it's going to be a problem that we're going to be talking about in the 2027 version of this panel. So in that sense, I don't worry. I actually think there's an opportunity for some software companies to take advantage of this, because I think there's a perception out there that this cost is real and that people are bearing it. And so I do think there's an opportunity for a software company. They go out to their customers and say, we've just added these new Gen AI features. We're really excited about them. We can see your customers are using them. You're getting value from them. This year we're going to have to raise price by 7-8%. And the person says, oh, that's a lot. You say, well, look, all this Gen AI stuff, it costs money to run it. You got to do it. And the true cost to them might be 1%. But there's this story about that. And so I actually think many companies can take advantage of it, as they think about future pricing.
Got it.
We will not accept price increases greater, anyway.
Matt, I don't know if you had anything to add on that.
I guess in a sales organization, I just want them to build the best product for our sales.
Very
to
logical
so,
answer.
Yes.
Understood.
He wants a 99.5% margin at all times.
Understood.
I do know we have multiple LLMs we use. Some are specialized, some are general, and then we use them in different parts of the application based on what makes the most sense for that piece of functionality to run at the lowest possible cost. So.
And that's an interesting concept, because I think you hear about this idea everybody's using or plugged into all the LLMs, but I hear less about people isolating which LLM to use in which use case. So that's a good point. Maybe the last, or close to the last topic, is just talk about unstructured versus structured data in an LLM world. I mean, we constantly hear about unstructured data, and the tools we've talked about today are very powerful for unstructured data, text and the like. But very few people, I think, talk about, for whatever reason, maybe we're not there yet, maybe it's secretive, the idea of using LLMs in a data analytics framework or on alternative data and asking questions of it. Maybe it's because of hallucinations. I'm not sure. I have some thoughts, but I'd love to hear what you guys think. Maybe you could start off on that, Akarsh.
Yeah, I think one of the coolest pilots we ran was we rolled out a sentiment agent. We're known for sentiment, and we have sentiment from 10 different perspectives. And we had a pilot, and we had a bunch of users, and we didn't tell them what they could do with it. We just said, here's the chat box. It can talk to these 18 different data sets. What would you ask? And what was fascinating, just watching them use it, is in a user's mind, you naturally just flow from a state of what was the sentiment of Apple for the last 5 years? And then you see a drop in the sentiment during a time. And they were like, what happened in July 2024? And it's just fluid. They don't know that it's a structured data agent or it's an unstructured. Nobody cares, actually. It's more like people that are developing these tools, we're forced into the tool set that you have. So you're like, no, we'll give you a dashboard for structured, and I'll give you a search box for unstructured. The reality is that I think in about a year's time, this is going to completely change. You're going to have a natural way of asking questions. The answers are going to be go find where the right answer is. It's an agent's going to do the data science work for you. It's going to pull the right sources for you, give you an answer, and then you can ask a follow-up question. And the question might be from a completely different area. of your internal like knowledge base to something else. And we've just seen it play out in real time. So it's almost like I don't care about structured or unstructured. It's like, what does a workflow look like? And where do I start inserting new tools that are capable of talking to structured data sets? That's the thesis right now, and that's kind of like what we're seeing play out.
Yeah, we've actually been doing some really interesting stuff with structured data sets. So at Bain, there's a company called Pixis that we bought about 5 years ago, and they have, I think, about 55 different alternative data sets. Some are more proprietary than others, but we get them from different places, and they have all the raw data. And so we use this to support our work with investors. We also sell dashboards to companies and other people. One of the things we found is we've added Gen AI on top of these dashboards, and it's made a big difference. So now, the companies that work with us, they can go in there and type in, what's the market share in Dallas, and it'll just, take 2 minutes, and then boop, here comes a bar chart that shows it over time, and then it's always on, and the next time they come back, it'll show the next period, and that's been really a big deal. I mean, we've seen some of the companies we work with be willing to pay more for dashboards that have that built in, and more exciting than that is we've seen the usage data. We've seen that more people at the company are using the Gen AI dashboards because they don't, it used to be there's some nerd and they know that the market share thing's on page 30. And, so if someone wants to know what if an executive wants to know what the market share thing is, they call the nerd and the nerd goes to page 30 and pulls the data and gives it to the executive and the executive shows to the CEO. Now, what happens is the executives just go in there themselves and type it in, right? He doesn't need that. And so we just see a lot more people using it, getting value from it. So that's been really exciting. And so I think, anyone out there who's got one of those, a quantitative data product should be thinking about how do we put this natural language interface on it as soon as possible, because I think it really broadens what you can do with it.
And is it SQL based, and then you got human in the loop because you got to check it all because it's not always accurate? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the data itself has been cleaned extensively with a combination of machine learning, AI, and lots of humans. So you have to start with a very, very pristine data set if you're going to use this kind of approach. In our case, we're using SQL queries of a Snowflake database, but obviously you could do it with Python as well or some other solution. At this point, we have enough confidence in it that we're letting it run, but I think we encourage people, if it's an important query, to check the numbers and
Sure.
make not it's a beta, it's marked beta, right? So we're still doing that, but I think we found the results are pretty good. I mean, as long as the underlying data is good, it's pretty smart, and the tool is pretty smart, right? If you ask a question, it doesn't quite understand what you mean, it'll come back and say, oh, you said you wanted to know the market share in Dallas. Did you mean this Dallas or this Dallas? Or it'll kind of ask a few questions. So I think we feel pretty good about what it's able to do, and I mean, I'm sure a year from now we'll feel amazing about it, right?
Yeah. And Evan, are you seeing much activity in the landscape about LLMs applied to actual structured data?
I think part of what Richard was saying is true. I think everybody who has, I'm not aware of any data vendor out there, really, who has any form of data who isn't attempting to strap an LLM of some kind on the front end of it to try to make it accessible to a new audience, to protect their data better, to do something. But they're all stapling an LLM onto something to varying results. I think what's interesting is when you see, as Karsh was alluding to, when you see people querying against things, there's folks who will ask things of unstructured data, and they'll say hey, can you bring it back to me in a structured way? And it's I never would have thought of that in a million years. And they're structuring queries, they're oh, okay. Or you can be asking questions of structured data and saying, give me unstructured responses, give me these kind of responses. What's interesting is you get the responses, and having the ability to have that conversation with an LLM, I think really makes a huge difference, because the first thing that comes back is never the right thing. It's never, but if it's directionally close to the right thing, or at least in the direction of the right thing, then you see people sharpening up and refining that thing, and that's where it gets very interesting. I don't see anyone really at this point trusting the AI model fully. I don't see anybody who's I've trained it, I've given it a series of conversations, now we're just gonna run it, and I'm gonna go take a nap and fire. There's always an element, if you want a human, either interpreting what's coming out of that thing or checking it. So there's always going to be a component of that for a while until we get to a much higher level of confidence. But definitely in seeing how people are using that, it's just they're running so far out ahead and thinking of things. And as that develops, I think it's going to be a component of everything. Either it's going to be a component of how you query against it. It may be a component of the output. It may be a component of how you interact with it. If we think about platforms like, the Bloomberg terminal that historically have been extremely inscrutable to a lot of people, being able to ask it questions in plain language and get out, the thing that the nerd wonk guy knows is on page like 72 and saying like, ah, it found it now. You don't need the nerd wonk guy. Well, what's he going to do? He will need a new job. And figuring out how that works, like all of those use cases are really interesting, and people are plugging these tools into everything. The question becomes, again, there's a cost of asking all these questions. Does the cost make sense for an interface? Does it make sense for an output? Is it generating enough to make it worthwhile in that use case? Those are going to be the questions we need to deal with going forward, but there's something there for everybody.
I think the way it's going to play out is other funds are going to see so say, for example, you're a consumer discretionary analyst. You cover 30 securities. Actually, you really just know about 30 securities. Your coverage list is probably 200, but you really stay on top of 30. We're hearing this on the sell side for a fact, by the way, that analysts that, if you go and speak to a large like sell side bank, they'll come and tell you in hours how much time an analyst spends on different tasks, because their coverage list is like 1,200 companies. We need to know everything about 1,200 companies. Well, the goalpost just changed. Now it's 2,400 companies, same team, same analyst. So I don't think it's actually the role of the human analyst is going to change, but take any part of your workflow that is cumbersome, that's going to be automated. And it's not going to be foolproof, but the direction of travel is within the next 2 years, these systems are going to get better. And something we spend a lot of time obsessing over is eval sets. Like the biggest skill a machine learning engineer today can have is figure out a way to test the system in a really smart way. If you can do that, then here's how accurate my system is on 20,000 different ways somebody can ask me this question, and it's pretty darn good. So I actually think that there's a future where all of these new tools are basically enabling the same types of people to do twice the amount of work, except the agents are doing most of the reading for them, and they just become high-powered decision engines to say, what do I do with this output that I just got?
And there's two kinds of people in the world. There's the people that would listen to an hour-long test data panel and be like, that is the most fascinating thing, and everybody else would be like, what the fuck is wrong with all of you?
No, but I think the exact same thing I see in private markets as well, right? I think that funds today, an analyst might look at 20 companies before they pick one that they're going to go after. Now it's going to be 40, right? Then it's going to be 60, right? So I don't think you're going to have fewer analysts, but the speed with which they can review a company and decide if it's for them is going to be so much faster that they'll be able to do smarter deals.
It's a question for you. In the private markets, like our investor is a private equity firm, we deployed our technology on them. The number one question I get is, due diligence sucks. Nobody likes to do it. Everybody has to do it. It's a very mechanical process if you really think about it. You'll have a bunch of criteria. Every firm, every group has a slightly different take on it, but that's kind of what it is. And that's like one of the first things I think is going to be automated soon, which is take something that nobody wants to do, just give me a bunch of suggestions, rank it for me, tell me why you ranked it, source all your activity, provide me a report. I'm just going to spend 2 hours in a report, and then instead of me looking at 30 things, I'm going to look at 5, even though I looked at twice more companies than I would have before. That's a real use case, and we're seeing that play out right now.
Yeah, I think 100%. I think you think about, again, what that day that the person has to spend getting smart on a company, it's like not a fun day, right? It's like you're reading through all these reports, you're getting on calls with people, you're trying to do all this work just to ultimately look at a company that there's a 5% chance you're actually going to do anything with, and a 95% chance you're going to just say, nope, not for us, moving on. So that's not fun. If you could do that instead of a day, you could do that in 2 hours. It's amazing, right?
But you'll have to wait 10 minutes for the answer.
Yes, you do have to wait 10 minutes, but still.
And that's a big reason why how we're working with a lot of our private equity clients is they're loading in 50 decks that they received, and they're going to say, what's the high-level summary of this deck? What's the growth rate? What's their, what X, Y, Z, and we're able to bring that and help them put that into a nice table and a nice grid that allows them to pull that using natural language questioning and answering, which can save them a ton of time. But yeah, it's definitely a big part of the process.
Perfect. We're coming to the end here, and I liked a question I heard earlier, so I'm going to steal it. And you guys have, let's call it 20 seconds, 30 seconds apiece. Anything you haven't covered, or more importantly, a prediction for the next year? Let's say we all get back up here in the next year. What do you think is a possible unexpected or perhaps expected outcome that you're really excited about? Why don't I start with you, Akarsh?
I was hoping to be the last guy. It's a thesis. Well, it'll play out soon. Agents are going to read more than humans are at scale. Most of the reading of raw content is going to be outsourced to agents, and human beings are going to read output from other agents doing reading on their behalf.
Perfect.
It's thesis.
Matt?
Just that I think the LLMs will get infinitely more powerful, better ones will come out, and it will change the industry
Great.
for the better.
Richard?
I think we're going to see an end to, or soon coming down of seat-based pricing for B2B software. I think as people see the writing on the wall and they say, uh-oh, are we going to be able to sell as many seats in the future when all the stuff that they just said happens? And we're going to see a lot more moving to consumption-based or outcome-based or other types of pricing models. And that's going to be a big shift that rolls through the whole industry.
Great. And Evan?
I mean, I don't know if you're going to see. I think you're going to see what Richard's talking about, which is building on what those guys are talking about. But I think it's going to be more extreme in that as you get the scale thing taking place, you're going to just get people coming out with like bulk flat pricing. Like it's not going to be like seat based. It's not going to be consumption based. Somebody's going to be like, this is the thing. We have the source of the thing, $100,000, and we're going to be like, that's absurd. And they're going to go, you can't get it anywhere else, and like whatever. And we're going to be like, we need to run 10 million queries to make that make sense. And they'll go, yeah. And then we're going to actually run 10 million queries, and then it's going to get interesting. So.
Great. Well, I will hold you to all of this, and thank you guys for coming out today. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.